The first presidential election that I could vote in was 2008. John McCain, Sarah Palin, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. All the way through last night. Last night, J.D. Vance turned in the best debate performance by a Republican, presidential or vice presidential, that I have seen in my voting lifetime. And it wasn't even all that close. J.D. Vance had to do two things last night. He had to get up there and point out the obvious, that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz cannot talk about day one. They can't sit there and try to tell the American people on day one, fill in the blank. Why? Because day one was 1,400 days ago for Kamala Harris. She is the sitting vice president. There was that goal. And then the other goal for J.D. Vance was to basically make himself and indirectly Donald Trump more palatable, more likable. J.D. Vance's favorability numbers have been poorly underwater since he was announced as Donald Trump's running mate. And J.D. Vance did both of those things very effectively. Now, do I think J.D. Vance, when it comes to some of the populist policies, is right on everything? No. But what you saw last night is a guy who showed why he is worthy of being Donald Trump's VP pick. And why Donald Trump and those in Donald Trump's inner circle saw a guy who was perfectly positioned to take the mantle and explain America First policies, explain Donald Trump's vision to the American people, frankly, in a more substantive way. It was great to see a guy last night who was able to, first off, effectively push back on some of the nonsense that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have been trying to sell the American people on for the better part of 2 months, but also do it in a way that's not just highly hyperbolic. And that's what you heard from J.D. Vance last night. It was about 9 minutes in to the debate last night as I'm watching J.D. Vance. And I'm watching him explain to Tim Walz, to the moderators, and ultimately to us, the American people, the American voter, that when it came to the first issue that was debated last night, foreign policy, after this war continues to break out in the Middle East, Kamala Harris has been in charge for 3 years. Let's not forget that.
Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
And that's something that took J.D. Vance 9 minutes to say last night. 9 minutes for him to point out, hey, you guys can talk about what you're going to do and how everything is Donald Trump's fault. You've had 3.5 years to correct all the wrongs of Donald Trump's administration. And all we've done is ended up in a world, in a country where everything is 20% more expensive, and we've got wars breaking out all over the world. While your boss, Tim Walz, your running mate, has been in the second most important position of power in the nation. Let's not forget that. And while it took Donald Trump an hour and a half to make that point last month in his debate, it took J.D. Vance 9 minutes to get to that point in his debate last night. It was literally the most important thing that needed to be said. And he got to it in the first 10 minutes, and that was wildly effective. And then there was J.D. Vance basically trying to figure out how to strip the narrative away from the media that he's this bad guy, and these clips that have surfaced of him on cable news over the years is just not the real J.D. Vance. And he was very effective with that as well. I thought he was calm in his approach, even when he was fact-checking the moderators, which we'll get to this morning. He was calm in his approach and his presentation. He told his personal story, which I know a lot of people in this audience are going to know from Hillbilly Elegy, the book, the movie. But remember, there are tens of millions of people tuning in who do not know his personal story. Growing up in poverty, raised by grandma, getting himself into the military, going to Ohio State and then Yale, becoming a U.S. Senator, all those things matter. Father of 3 young children, 7 and under. Wife who is working out of the home but trying to balance that being a mom with being a worker, all those things that millions of families around the country think about every single day. It was personable. It was relatable. And what you saw was a guy who, if that 2 a.m. call does come, if you are the final voice in the Situation Room, J.D. Vance proved that he was the guy of these 2 options on the stage last night you would feel much more comfortable with. Tim Walz, remember, these debates are just as much about how you portray yourself as it is what you say. In many respects, it's more about how you portray yourself and how you look versus what you say. J.D. Vance looked the part. Tim Walz could not have had more of a deer in the headlights look if he tried. And the memes are running rampant this morning, with Tim Walz just looking like a guy who was so far in over his head last night. In many respects, I think back to 2012 when Paul Ryan got smoked by Joe Biden in his debate. And Paul Ryan just looked like a kid who wasn't ready for it. Now, he was a young man in his early 40s, I believe, at the time, but he looked like he wasn't ready for the big time. He looked like he was just there, happy-go-lucky, right? Well, J.D. Vance was the young buck who looked like he was ready last night. He looked like the guy who got called up to the big leagues as the big-time prospect and, hit for the cycle in his first day on the job. Tim Walz looked like the guy who got called up from AAA because they needed a body, and he struck out 3 times looking, John.
Call up the veteran for a cup of coffee. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. The guy's been sitting in AAA for most of his career. Boy, we need somebody. The roster just grew to 40 men, and he totally bombed out. You can't look at Tim Walz last night, side by side with J.D. Vance, and regardless of policy, say that's the guy I want potentially to be a heartbeat away from being the next president of the United States. Could you see Tim Walz negotiating with our enemies, with the worst actors on the planet last night, with how he handled himself? It's impossible to view Tim Walz in that light. And I'm not just sitting here on a Wednesday morning telling you what you want to hear. I said 3 weeks ago, Donald Trump had a bad debate night. I said that Donald Trump missed opportunity after opportunity. I've said that Donald Trump is not good as a general election debater. And that's why when I watched J.D. Vance last night, I thought, my goodness, this is so refreshing. It is so refreshing to watch a guy with such command of the policies and facts and leaving the hyperbole at the door and explaining to the American people, here's what's worked, here's what is not working, here's why. And that's what he laid out in layman's terms last night. 913-408-7957.
Yeah, I'm still writing my answers. I may need some more paper, like an essay test here, to Tim Walz's question about, now, what would Donald Trump talk about if they had passed that border thing in legislation? I'm like, oh, you want a list? Surely. That was meant to be rhetorical, but dude.
Yeah.
Don't ask.
He did not do a good job. Now, he's got a tough job as well. Imagine trying to defend Kamala Harris's policies, right? And positions. No one even knows what they are for the most part. But that was a near impossible job. And J.D. Vance wiped the floor with him. 913-408-7957. It is 6:14 as we get it rolling on a Wednesday morning. I do want to hear from you and get your immediate reaction to what you heard last night. And then the next question here is whether or not and how much it actually moves the needle in this debate, in this election. I believe more so than many VP debates, and we'll get into that conversation coming up on 95.7 FM KCMO and streaming this morning on the KCMO Talk Radio app. On the text line, 913-408-7957. Pete, last night was the first time I had the opportunity to watch J.D. Vance. I was very impressed and definitely think he will add a lot to Donald Trump's ticket and will be an excellent candidate for president in 2028. Not to jump too far ahead, but there is no doubt that J.D. Vance positioned himself as the frontrunner in 2028, no matter what happens coming up on November 5. But as for November 5, you look at this last night, and in a race that's as close as this one, and the fact that we are not getting, at least as of today, another presidential debate. Last night had more meaning than your run-of-the-mill VP debate because we only had one presidential debate, and also because, well, in the case of Tim Walz, people don't really know Kamala Harris. No one ever voted for her. So the VP pick matters more because people are still trying to understand and get to know the ticket. And in J.D. Vance's case, with Donald Trump, if he wins, being a one-term president, there is more intrigue around who his VP pick is than there would be in a traditional setting where someone's running at the top of the ticket, and if they win, they theoretically have 8 years to be in the White House. That's not the case with Donald Trump. And what J.D. Vance did effectively last night is he stripped down the media narrative of J.D. Vance. The cable news childless cat lady guy was nowhere in sight. What you had instead was a young, fresh face in American politics. You saw the leader on a deep bench on the Republican side of the aisle. And you saw a guy who was respectful, who was well prepared, who was articulate, and who was not the meme person that the left has made him out to be. Somewhere, if Taylor Swift was watching last night, whether she's here in Kansas City or somewhere else, Taylor Swift had to be like, wait, this is not who my liberal handlers told me this guy was. Somewhere, there might be, if there's any soul searching, an ounce of buyer's remorse from Taylor Swift, who told her 500 million followers that she was voting for Kamala Harris in large part because of the deer in the headlights guy we saw on the stage last night in Tim Walz. My goodness. Taylor Swift has been wrong about many men in her life. I hope that Travis Kelce's not one of them. But you can just put Tim Walz at the top of that list. 913-408-7957. This can absolutely move the needle in this election because of how close it is and the unique circumstances that we find ourselves in right now. Tom is in Paola. He's first up on a Wednesday post-VP debate morning on KCMO. Tom, what's going on?
Can you hear me?
I got you, Tom. What's happening, buddy?
Hey, man. So, for me, it was a drinking game. How many times did Tim Walz say Minnesota?
Well, you must have been passed out by the, first quarter hour.
Right. But you know what? J.D. Vance, man, what a show he put on. I'm really excited for him. If he runs in 4 years, man, I think that guy's going to get president.
Well, listen, there's a lot between now and 2028. Let's get to the next 5 weeks before we worry about that. But you're right. I mean, there's no doubt that win or lose, he positioned himself as a front runner for 2028 with how he handled himself last night. I mean, in many respects, I'm always a fan of governors because of what they do and the role that they have. But J.D. Vance is basically on the debate stage what a lot of people hoped Ron DeSantis would be. J.D. Vance was just a lot better at it.
Right.
No doubt about it. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you, my man. Let's go to 913-408-7957. Gardner, that's where John's at on a Wednesday. John, what's up?
Hey, Pete, good morning. It's great to hear you so jazzed, but I'm right there with you. JD was measured, controlled, the new fresh face of conservatism. I love it. I'll tell you what, though, I was let's talk about defund the police and Minneapolis burning down and all this. But he didn't go there because when January 6th came up, JD didn't want to look back. He wanted to, focus on now and then look forward. So that said, that kind of got him out of the January 6th junk. But just like nothing in the past was, he didn't take the bait on, 4 years ago, Donald Trump anything. I thought it was really very brilliant. That was good.
It was. It was.
Yeah.
There's no doubt, John. Thank you, man. And listen, if there was one thing where maybe Tim Walz had a decent part of the night, it would have been the January 6th stuff. But I thought that JD pivoted out of it just fine by saying, I'm looking forward. The American people are looking forward. And by the way, the people who are waiting for January 6th conversations are already voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. If January 6th is a top 2 or 3 issue for you, you are running to the polls for Kamala Harris. All the polling shows that, first off, that's not a top issue for the American people at large, but certainly not undecided voters. They don't want to hear and talk about January 6th. Could J.D. Vance have spun it back and talked about defund the police in Minneapolis and everything else, where Tim Walz was the governor at the time? Sure, he could have. But part of what J.D. Vance was doing last night is he did not want to take a hammer to the head, figuratively speaking, of Tim Walz. You heard him basically show empathy and sympathy for Tim Walz at times. When Tim Walz mentioned his son had been around a shooting in some capacity, what did J.D. Vance do? He turned to Tim Walz and he said, Tim, I'm sorry to hear that happen to your son. I didn't know about that. And I think it was genuine, but it also was to make a point that the media portrayal of me is such a lie. I am not that guy. J.D. Vance was not on that stage last night looking to be the combative guy. Now, he pointed out the flaws of Kamala Harris as vice president. He pointed out the flaws of Tim Walz's tenure as governor. He pointed out how their ideas have failed the American people. But he didn't do it in a way that was condescending, that was obnoxious, and that was going to potentially turn off the voters that Donald Trump needs to win the election. And we know the gender gap is real. We've talked a lot about it on this show. Ask yourself this. Did Tim Walz help himself with men? Did J.D. Vance help himself with women? Who do you think helped themselves more with the gender that they're struggling with? J.D. Vance undoubtedly showed a side of himself as a young father and an American veteran that should help him with women in a way that Tim Walz did not do anything to help himself with the male voter. 913-408-7957. We are about 9 hours removed from the end of that debate last night between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, when I thought J.D. Vance turned in the best debate performance of my voting life. And the first year I was able to vote was 2006. The first presidential election I was able to vote in was 2008. And what you saw year after year, term after term, was Republicans either fumble or mumble or not be able to present their points all that well, get flustered by their opponents, flustered by the moderators. And trust me, the moderators, they weren't ABC bad. I mean, it's hard to top David Muir's pathetic performance from 3 weeks ago now, but they were certainly still very biased. But what did J.D. Vance do? He stayed calm. He stayed cool. He stayed collected. Because when the facts and the issues are on your side and you have confidence in your presentation, the moderators can do what they're going to do, but you are still able to combat that. And you are still able to say, you know what? I mean, if you want to try to make this all about climate change when it comes to Hurricane Helene, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, as J.D. Vance talked about last night, the fact that you have a Democratic Party that is pushing for, air quotes, green energy, where a lot of those parts are made in China. Let's have that conversation, shall we? It was a great pivot and a great point, and it was also fact-based. So when you have that wealth of knowledge, when you have the information in the back of your head, in the back of your mind, and you feel good about how you're about to present your facts, doesn't matter how biased these moderators are. They were not good last night. But when you have someone of J.D. Vance's intellect and depth, it's almost irrelevant, even when it feels like it's 3-on-1. Colton's in Gower on KCMO. Good morning, Colton.
Morning, Pete. How are you?
I'm doing well. What's happening, brother?
Good. Hey,
So I have an interesting thought here. Everybody talks about how, well, it's just the VP debate. How much does it really matter who's going to be paying attention? Well, I think the current situation that we're in shows why we should be paying attention if we haven't been in the past. Because, I mean, look at Kamala Harris. VP has been moved to the top of the Democratic ticket, right?
Yep.
Not receiving one vote.
Yeah.
Go ahead and look at Donald Trump. We had 2 assassination attempts. What happens if there's a third who gets to run right into, become president directly after that if something terrible was to happen? J.D. Vance is sitting there. That he could be the most dangerous thing to the Democratic Party currently.
Yeah, and that's why Donald Trump picked him. And listen, J.D. Vance, thank you, Colton, it was not my top choice, but he continues to grow on me in the sense that we are seeing a guy come into his own, get more confident, and also being able to, frankly, explain Donald Trump's vision in large part better than Donald Trump. The Wall Street Journal wrote this editorial last night, early this morning, headlined, J.D. Vance makes a better case for Trump than Donald Trump. That's not wrong. In fact, it's spot on. They open up the piece here. The political cliche is that the vice presidential debates don't matter to the ultimate election result. But even if it turns out to be true about Tuesday's debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, Americans were at least able to watch a substantive debate that came closer to revealing the election choice than anything their running mates have offered. They write here, J.D. Vance was especially effective in sanding down the sharper edges of GOP policies that Democrats in the past portray as cruel. He addressed abortion policy by conceding that the voters of Ohio had chosen to pass a policy he opposed. But in a democracy, that is what you have to accept. He also conceded that Republicans had to do more to win back the trust of the American people on that specific issue. So he was able to contextualize and explain that more effectively than Donald Trump. 913-408-7957. Libby's in Waldo. Go ahead, Libby. You're on KCMO.
Hi there, Pete. Thank you very much for taking my call, and thank you, John. One thing, I have been watching VP debates and presidential debates since, 1970. And I will tell you, I agree with you, Pete. This probably was the most well-handled debate I have ever seen in my voting lifetime. And I also want to say, even though the moderators kind of got on my nerves sometimes, I thought this group, these two, did a better job than the previous debates. I thought they did okay.
Yeah. I mean, Tim Walz, thank you, Libby. You're right. Tim Walz started off nervous, and J.D. Vance won this thing in the first, 35 minutes. Tim Walz calmed down a little bit, and he was okay on the back end, but by then it was over. It's like a pitcher giving up 7 runs in the first 2 innings and then throwing 4 scoreless. Well, you're down 7-0, so what's it really worth? But he kind of did okay on the back end. But by then, the whole thing was over. But it was really refreshing to see two guys actually just try to compare policy and talk about their vision. The problem for Tim Walz is he's trying to defend the indefensible. That's the biggest problem for him. Mike's in Gardner. Mike, you're on KCMO. What's up, buddy?
Morning, Pete. Talking about Tim, I was shocked when the moderators brought up the question about Tiananmen Square and his lies. He's lied about so many things. And when they asked that question, I was like, what? These guys are actually going to do something good as far as a debate. And I realized that they just teed him up to put it to rest. And he did not, because he lied about being over there in Tiananmen Square when it was happening. And in fact, he showed up months later, and it reminded me of Hillary Clinton saying she was named after Sir Edmund Hillary, and she was born before he even went up to the summit. So it's just one of those lies, and he did not put it to rest. He was teed up to put his lie to rest, and any lie to rest, and nobody brought up his actual rank at retirement either. So
Well, they each got one gotcha question, right, on their personal
Yes,
side.
sir, they did.
He was asked about the Tiananmen Square deal, and he handled it horribly. J.D. Vance was asked about, hey, you used to say all these bad things about Donald Trump. And so they each got one of those gotcha questions, and J.D. Vance came out of that back and forth looking much better.
Yes, he did a good job.
Yeah. Thank you,
Hey,
Mike.
You're doing a great job here, Pete. Thanks.
Appreciate you, man. Yeah, I've got that clip here. J.D. Vance, it was about 40 minutes in last night. They each got asked one question that was supposed to be the gotcha. Tim Walz, falls all over himself trying to answer his lies about Tiananmen Square. It was awful. Not as bad as him saying he was friends with school shooters, but it was bad. J.D. Vance gets asked about, hey, you used to say all these mean things about Trump. And J.D. Vance gave as refreshing an answer as we've seen in American politics in a long time.
If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on.
We've gotten to this place in politics. Obama started it and Trump carried the torch, where politicians never say, I was wrong. I was wrong about this. I screwed that up. And it's permeated all the way down to the local level. You have now local politicians who can't say I screwed that up. I've asked Quentin Lucas questions. Hey, can you admit you were wrong on this? No. It's across the political aisle, by the way. One of the most refreshing things for a human being to say is, I was wrong. Because guess what? You're flawed. We're all flawed. None of us are perfect. You get things wrong. People that you agree with politically screw up. And we've spent about a decade and a half in this place where no politician ever admits they got something wrong. And J.D. Vance saying, yeah, I was wrong about Trump. So what? Now I realize he's right about a lot of stuff. It's not difficult to do. Instead of twisting himself into a pretzel and being like, you guys are just attacking me, it was just real. And it was so refreshing. And if that can come back to American politics, man, we'll all be better off, regardless of your political preference. 913-408-7957 as we roll through the 6 o'clock hour here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. There is something that is now happening as well on the news side, on the TV side. In the wake of last night's decision, we'll tell you what that is next. So there was a fallout that came yesterday before the debate that I think is a very smart move by one of these campaigns I will get to here in 2 minutes on KCMO Talk Radio as we react to the vice presidential debate on 95.7 FM. Hit that presets on your radio dial. We are almost 1 year into being on 95.7 FM. Of course, the debate aired last night right here on KCMO. And thanks to those of you who came out to Politics in a Pint. We had a great crowd at American Legion Post 370 on 75th Street. We were joined by Doug Bedford running for Johnson County Sheriff. And then we also had out Steve Howe, the district attorney in Johnson County, in place of Dr. Prasanth Reddy, who could not be there because his mother passed away 2 days ago. And these guys were awesome. The American Legion Post 370 was a fantastic host. We had about 150 of you out there last night with a great showing, and thank you to all of you who came out and made that a really great event. It was first one we had done in a few months. It's getting harder sometimes to pin folks down for these, but when you keep showing up, it makes it possible. So thank you for that, and great to see a lot of you out there as well. Jerry's in Crystal Lakes. What's up, Jerry? Go ahead. You're on KCMO.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I just had a brief comment. First, I think that the debate was in accordance with the moderators, it was very, very poorly veiled as a Kamala Harris moderation. It didn't have anything to do with being neutral. Secondarily, I think it was absolute censorship when they cut the microphones when the two candidates began arguing, because I think that everyone who was listening deserved to hear what was being said instead of those two disrupting women. And not that it's important that they were women, it's just that they were.
It's not important that they were women, but they were. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there, Jerry. I thought Margaret Brennan came off much worse than Norah O'Donnell. Margaret Brennan was the one to the right on the screen as they were showing him. Norah O'Donnell was kind of harmless, but Margaret Brennan was the one who was cutting the mics and, being a little condescending at times to J.D. Vance. But here's the thing, Jerry. Why I'm confident, why I feel good about this, and I appreciate the call, is that it didn't get to J.D. And J.D. wasn't bothered by the moderators being, biased in their question setups. Because when you have the confidence and when you're able to talk through the issues and you feel like the issues are on your side, even when it's 3-on-1, it doesn't really matter. One of the problems for Trump and what was so frustrating about Donald Trump and his debate is that, yes, the moderators were totally biased and total hacks. But Trump also just didn't know how to handle it. Or, frankly, didn't have command on the detailed policy items to combat the moderator bias. J.D. Vance did. And it goes to show you that when Republicans are in a position where they've got someone who can communicate in the way that J.D. Vance can, even when the moderators aren't on your side, you can cut through the BS. And that's what's been frustrating to me, because we know the moderators are going to be biased, right, for the most part. We know that. We understand that. But I firmly believe when the issues are as strongly on your side as they are in this case, in this election, it doesn't matter. And J.D. Vance proved that last night. So, yeah, the moderators did what I thought they were going to do, but all in all, I didn't lose an ounce of sleep over it because of how he handled it. So, that's what ultimately matters to me. Now, what's going to happen here over the next 5 weeks? Well, this came out yesterday. Donald Trump pulled out of the 60 Minutes interview that was scheduled to run next week, according to CBS News. They were planning to have both Donald Trump and Vice President Harris for sit-down interviews as part of the show's election special set to air on Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Donald Trump was going to be interviewed by Scott Pelley. Harris was going to speak with Bill Whitaker. And the Trump campaign has decided not to participate. Well, good for him. That's my first reaction. Good for him. The media will probably mock Trump. They will claim that he is backing out. CBS will say that, well, our show has done interviews with presidential candidates of both parties for the last 50 years. 60 Minutes is irrelevant. If Kamala Harris wants the stage to herself on 60 Minutes, go ahead. Let her have it. If the last impression that tens of millions of Americans have of the Donald Trump campaign is J.D. Vance last night, frankly, that's better for Donald Trump. Why Donald Trump would go into a situation with 60 Minutes when he did that 4 years ago, and he brought up the Hunter Biden laptop story, and I'm blanking on the person who was doing that Q&A with him on 60 Minutes. Leslie Stahl, that's who it was. And Leslie Stahl does the whole thing of, oh, come on, Mr. we can't confirm the Biden laptop story. Oh, come on. You don't really believe that now, do you? Why would he go back to that platform? Why would he give a courtesy to that outlet? That was a bias towards his running mate last night, but his running mate handled it perfectly. And 4 years ago, clearly was in the tank for his opponent and treated the Hunter Biden laptop story like it was Russian disinformation because a bunch of Biden bureaucratic buddies said that it was. Why would he give him the time of day? Why? Why would Donald Trump waste his time talking to 60 Minutes? who is not going to give a fair shake of an interview to Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? Come on, please. So this is smart. There is zero upside for Donald Trump going into that situation. And the media can mock him and say, oh, he's afraid of CBS. Please, no one's done more media in the last 8-9 years than Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is the one who has been running afraid from the media. The numbers showcase that. And if you think the American people are going to be like, oh, Donald Trump's afraid to do interviews because of this, please. They will try to taunt him. They will. But he shouldn't fall for it for a second. It also tells me he thinks he's in a pretty good position. Yesterday was a 3-for on my end. The Royals win, my Mets win, and J.D. Vance wins. What more do I need? Woo! Man, this week is flying by for the better. Wow. Good morning. Thanks for being here on KCMO morning after the debate. Oh, and by the way, we had an awesome Politics in a Pint last night. About 150 of you coming out, joining us with Doug Bedford running for sheriff in Johnson County, alongside Steve Howe, the district attorney, who did an awesome job in place of Dr. Prasanth Reddy, who couldn't be there because of the passing of his mother. And it was awesome to see so many of you out there, a lot of new faces that we had not seen before at various events. Met some callers. Usually you don't meet the callers. Callers are about 1% of the audience in radio typically. So I don't get to meet a lot of them because they don't show up to events just based on the odds, but got to meet some great callers who are regulars on this show, and we had a great night all around. Everyone's always looking for John, though, and I'm like, geez, we'll have to get John out for one of these Politics in a Pints.
It's that one dude I didn't play his Thompson Twins request on ZZ99 about 85, yeah. So he's still looking for me.
Speaking of callers, let's go to Dave in Excelsior Springs. Dave, what's happening, my man?
Good morning. Well, let me just say right now, oh my God, I would rather have either one of these two candidates than Trump or Harris. Yeah. I think they both presented themselves well. They were articulate. There was no name calling. There was no stupid antics by Trump. If Trump loses this election, it's because of Donald Trump. Let's face it.
I agree.
Because the man, there's just something wrong with him. I mean, I love his policies, but he is. There's just.
Well, he's just his own worst enemy sometimes. I mean, that's the best way to put it.
Sometimes he's always his own worst enemy. If he sticks to script, he could be okay. But when he starts veering off and going off on his tangents, and then I could go on and on about the stupid things that he continues to say and do. But J.D. Vance, I feel very good about him as vice president.
Curious.
I think he presented himself well. He's articulate. He's thoughtful. I think he would consult with other people. I think he would listen to other ideas. I thought that was two classy people up there that represented themselves and the country well.
Who are you voting for on November 5, Dave?
You know what? At this point, I really don't know.
Really?
I don't like Trump. I think there's something wrong with him. I really do. I voted for him the last two times. I don't like any of Harris's policies. I'm at this point, I think I'm leaning toward Trump, but he's just. I just wish it. I've wanted Nikki Haley so bad, but we got Trump. So what are you going to do?
Well, it's a binary choice. Dave, thanks for listening. Here's what I will say. The takeaway for me last night is that it was so refreshing to see someone make the case for Trump's policies in an articulate manner that drops all the hyperbole and rhetoric. And that's what J.D. Vance did. Like, J.D. Vance made a better case for Donald Trump than Donald Trump makes the case for Donald Trump. And what you're seeing now, and frankly, what should scare the bejesus out of the left, is that the next wave of Republicans, and this is obviously years away, I'm not trying to jump the gun here, but the next wave, the J.D. Vances, the Ron DeSantises, maybe you throw in the Josh Hawleys of the world, who can actually take this America First policy that Trump deserves a lot of credit for bringing to American politics. But the next wave that can soften the edges and articulate it in a better manner, that is far more dangerous to the left side of the political aisle from a political perspective. I don't mean literally dangerous. I just mean in terms of like winning and losing elections. Much more dangerous to them than Donald Trump. Trump is who he is. He's a 35,000-foot guy. He's a CEO. And yes, he certainly likes to step on that rake and have that rake hit him on the face at the least opportune times. But last night to me was also a good thing for Donald Trump because it showed that he picked an excellent running mate. He picked a running mate that clearly was made for that moment last night. A guy who has an incredible life story, serves the country, becomes an Ivy League graduate at Yale, has a very successful private sector career, writes an all-time best-selling book, becomes a movie, venture capitalist, U.S. senator, and is able to, in that moment, in that spot last night with tens of millions of Americans watching, articulate the clear differences between what Donald Trump did during his 4 years in office versus what Kamala Harris has done during her 4 years in office as Joe Biden's vice president. And that is basically last night what I've been begging for, frankly, Donald Trump to do, which is make the case in a more substantive way without the greatest this, the best that, and go through the numbers. And it was so outstanding. And maybe that's why I was so excited by it, because I haven't seen a debate like that from a candidate that I prefer in a very long time, frankly, ever in my adult life. And he was not flustered by the moderators. In fact, he beautifully fact-checked the moderators. Yeah, that was Tim Walz last night. Man, that guy bit the dust, huh? What a deer in the headlights look he had going on. I mean, just the optics of Walz, who looked like he was about to soil himself every time he was about to speak, combined with just this, writing down and looking at his notepad. And it's like, what are we doing here, high school teach? Come on now. Stare at JD. Be a man. You want to be in the foxhole with that guy? My goodness. So it was a huge win for J.D. Vance last night. And I'm not saying that. I'm not telling you that because that's what you want to hear. I have said time and time again, Donald Trump 3 weeks ago had a bad debate. He technically, in my opinion, lost that debate. I also didn't think that debate was going to hurt him in a big way, and it's proven to have not. But J.D. can move the needle. And he did move the needle in a lot of ways last night. Mark is on KCMO and Independence. Hey, Mark, good morning.
Hey, good morning. By the way, the politics and a pint. It was great last night, even though I live in Jackson County. I went over to Johnson County to visit. It was nice meeting you. And by the way, Johnson County, I hope they realize they have a great prosecutor, somebody who wants to enforce the law, but even says he treats everybody, legal or illegal, the same under the enforcement of the law. I thought that was a great comment. And he also indicated he doesn't want to just necessarily lock everybody up and throw away the key, but at the same time, he wants to enforce the law and, keep the crime rate down. The gentleman who's running for sheriff also seemed to have the same qualities, and I thought it was nice of them. The night of the debate, they could have been somewhere else, but a group of people are at home, and they took the time to talk to the people. Yeah. It was nice of your radio station to sponsor it, and I thought J.D. Vance did fine, but I thought J.D. Vance did himself very well when Mr. Walz indicated there was a bonehead play with the comments on Tiananmen Square. But if you know notice what J.D. Vance did, which was very smart, he didn't jump all over him for it. Then afterwards, he indicated, yeah, we all kind of sometimes say something that's boneheaded, and I thought that did him very well, and I thought that's where the knockout punch was.
Yes, exactly right. Mark, great to meet you last night. Thanks for coming over to it. We appreciate that.
Thank you. I had a great time. I'm going to do it again.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah, Mark coming over, got to meet him. I usually don't get to meet a lot of the callers because the callers are about 1% of your audience, but we met a bunch last night. We had a great crowd, 150-plus folks out there for the Politics in a Pint. It was outstanding, and The American Legion Post 370 did an awesome job hosting us as well. But he's right. J.D. Vance, listen, he was going for the gentleman card last night. He was not going for the knockout blow, bull in the china shop. You got that with Trump. If that's what you're looking for, you got it with Trump. JD's goal was to first off soften himself from the childless cat lady memes, but then also just soften the edges around the ticket as a whole. And I thought he did that incredibly effectively. There was the moment last night when the mics got turned off, which I wanted to get to here. And we were told that CBS News was not going to fact check or do any of that. Well, they tried to fact check J.D. Vance on the migrants in Springfield, Ohio, specifically whether or not they are technically illegal or not. And here's what that sounded like.
And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own
leadership. Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
J.D. Vance, even that, I thought he handled with grace and with class, while effectively and politely pushing back and saying, hey, you guys said you weren't going to fact check. If you're going to do it, I'd like to respond and explain this. And with all due respect to Donald Trump could not have done that in a million years last night. What J.D. Vance was talking about was this app that began back in late 2020 called the CB1 mobile app. It was launched by Customs and Border Protection. And how this app works is that those who are in the country who can't qualify for any other type of visa, basically someone who's here illegally, logs onto this government app on their phone. It's called the CBP1 app, and it stands for Customs and Border Protection app. And you can apply for an appointment on this app. Now, if an appointment is granted, which, let's be honest, show me examples of the Joe Biden White House not granting approval in this app, the migrant can then enter the country for between 1 and 2 years on a temporary status known as parole, which comes with a work permit. Hundreds of thousands that we know of, migrants have entered the country this way, whether it's along the border, ports of entry, or airports, after they pay for their own plane ticket. Or maybe somebody else pays for the plane ticket. Who knows? Are those people here legally or not? As J.D. Vance points out, it's individuals who get a magic Kamala Harris wand waved over their heads and get to basically work here because they put their name into an online app on their phones. Now, when this person's parole expires, what happens? They have no legal status unless they've applied for asylum or another immigration program in the meantime. Now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have argued that allowing this is a better way to deter people from entering illegally. Come on, please. And they claim it's a better way for the government to track where these individuals are. Yeah, okay. Now, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have countered that by saying, well, while they're maybe not technically entering illegally, you're still adding to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are coming into a country, however they're doing it, with no plan from the country or the communities they end up in, and how to do this in a way that doesn't also impact the American citizen, like in Springfield, Ohio, where you've had 20,000 people come into a community of about 50,000, where there's naturally going to be impacts to your schools, to your public services, to your hospitals. So they've kind of made up this new claim of how you can be here temporarily. And the media angle is, well, they're not illegal. Okay. That's a debatable term. But if you think it takes away from the broader point of 10 to 15 million people coming into the country the last 3.5 years and thinking there's no impact on the American citizen, well, you're kidding yourself. And you also probably think that Tim Walz looked like a real stud up there last night, which certainly was not the case.